Pastor Roy Gerhardt from Galloway United Methodist Church in Franklin, Pennsylvania, sharing a few words of encouragement to help us follow after Jesus. You know, raising kids can really be challenging. I mean, kids are not always they're ready to listen to everything they're told. Sometimes it's like herding cats, raising kids. But as parents, we really expect and seek after a certain degree of obedience from our kids. Why? Because we're in a position where we're not just there to be their friends. We are there to safeguard their lives. We need them to be obedient because we don't want them to run out into traffic and get run over by a car. We don't want them to put their hand on a hot stove. And we don't want them to go out with their friends and do things that will put them in danger, either physically or morally in their lives and lead to disaster. No, we are there to be those kinds of protectors and guides. And so we expect and seek an obedience from them that we could say no, and they could listen and learn and be kept safe under that direction. Now, in our walk with God, it's no less true that God is seeking an obedience and a faithfulness from us as well, because God is like a parent, looking out for us, guiding, protecting, safeguarding us in our lives. In fact, Jesus taught us that when we pray, we should call God our Father. And so we're to think of this relationship with God as that connection where we can exercise a trust as a child does in her parent, and an obedience in that trust that would let God guide and direct us in our lives. Sometimes, as kids, what our parents tell us no about or what our parents ask us to do makes no sense. And yet, it is for our benefit. And very much like that, in our walk with God, sometimes what God asks us to do doesn't make sense. Sometimes God's restrictions to our life don't make sense to us up front. Well, there are times, though, that down the road, just like with our parents, we look back over our shoulder and we say, boy, they were way smarter than I gave them credit for. And look, you're going to have those kind of revelations in your life and your walk with God as well, that you're going to be looking back and saying, wow, God saved me from all kinds of things. God protected me. Man, God was so wise and so on top of things. And it's incredible whenever that happens to us. You know, that we just really see that God works in mysterious ways, that God is way ahead of us in the plans, and that God is able to, in fact, make a way for us in ways that we could have never foreseen. So we need to have that kind of obedience in our walk with God, even when it's a struggle. That's one of the things that as we look at the prophet Hosea, I take away from his story. He was so willing to be obedient to God, even when God called on him to marry a woman that good sense would have said, stay away from her. This is a bad pick for a wife. And yet God called him to marry this woman that he knew up front was an unfaithful woman. And this had all the earmarks of trouble ahead, that this was going to be a pathway fraught with heartache. And it was. But Hosea was willing. Now, last week we had looked at the prophet Jonah, who, when God called him to go and bear witness to the city of Nineveh, of God's judgment, well, he turned around and went the opposite way. He was flat out disobedient to God, straight out of the gates. And even when God constrained him by way of a great fish and brought him to Nineveh, and he bore that witness in his heart, he was still disobedient and really not buying into what God had called him to. Listen, in your life and mine, God is going to call us in steps that will challenge us. They're not all easy. They don't all make sense. They don't all look like they're a good idea to us up front. But nonetheless, in faith and in trust, we step out to follow God. We take his hand like a child getting hold of their parent and walk across the street with them. And God leads us into paths that he is working out his plan in. And listen, when you trust God, he has amazing ways of putting you and me into positions where we grow, where we become witnesses, where we are able to minister in the power of Jesus Christ with the gospel of salvation. And so I want to urge you that when God is leading, you trust him. Let him take that lead and make you into the blessing that he has planned. So may the Lord bless you today, and as you share his good news, may God make you a blessing wherever he takes you. And remember, share these videos and pass along this blessing as well.